So hello, I'm Timur Khan. I'm a research master's student at Leiden University in Middle Eastern Studies, currently focusing on Durrani rule in the 18th and 19th centuries in Peshawar, nowadays northwest Pakistan.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Timur, and I'm really excited to hear more about your research. Are those your main research interests? I mean, could you talk about a little bit more about what interests you about this region and about the Iranian and Persianate world more generally?
Sure. So this is my kind of current project, but I'd say overall, my main interest is kind of early modern and some colonial as well. Uh, Afghan history, but with Afghan kind of in the more historic sense of the word or historical sense of the word. And I'm simplifying a bit, which is maybe not doing it full justice, but generally referring to Pashto speaking communities who have a kind of shared identity and who at a certain point also refer to themselves as Afghans. Because nowadays, of course, it means a citizen of the country of Afghanistan, but that's a more modern thing. So when I talk about Afghan, that's usually what I mean. And I'm interested in these Afghan societies, groups in kind of the early modern period, and then also in the colonial. So there are a few areas that I would be willing to research within that, from kind of Eastern Iran into India. There's a whole range of things that are possible there, but for the moment, I'm in Peshawar.
Thank you very much. And what led you to pursue this topic for your master's project?
So it's a few things, but one of the main things I can highlight, while I was between my bachelor's and starting my master's here, I started in September of 2019. And between summer of 2018 and then I was in Pakistan for 8 months or so. And I was also doing some research into family history. So there's a bit of a personal element there. My father's side of my family are from Peshawar, and I researched a particular ancestor of mine who was alive between 1839 and 1903, I think. And he had, something of a political career, was a kind of local notable in the area in the kind of colonial period. And there was a bit of information about his father who had been around during the Sikh period as well. And what I found doing that research and wanting to contextualize it into the kind of pre-Sikh, the Durrani period, was that it was very difficult for me to find a lot of concrete information about Peshawar in that time period. And I felt it was really understudied, and nobody had really bothered with Peshawar much in general, but especially in that time period. And I felt that could be something to flesh out.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's nice that you've brought in this personal connection to it as well. I think that always adds some depth to study.
It did definitely help, as far as I think that initial push, just and the kind of excitement of doing research and finding things that are kind of original or that other people haven't put out before. It's going to be, if it's family history, and as much as nobody but you will care as much about your family history, so you're probably
Not
the
at
first
all.
person to kind of put it all together, and you get the feeling for that kind of work, and then I think that really helped.
I think so, and the thing is, you can link it to sort of the wider themes of what was happening in that area and in that political time frame as well. So that's amazing. If I can just ask very briefly, what was the research like? You said you were researching into family history. Did you go into a local archive, or where exactly did you go?
I had the advantage that this particular individual that I was researching is reasonably well attested, in kind of colonial records, and it was to the point that I didn't end up doing real archival work at the time. Also, just because I was not experienced and I didn't really know how to start, but I had plenty of published material that allowed me to pull together quite a number of references that allowed me to sort of piece together his career. And there was one book in particular which was really helpful, which was done off the back of a lot of archival research, and it was a book by a former brigadier, I think, in the Pakistan military, who
I
just
see.
self-published this big, several volume history of
Oh,
the
okay.
Pathans or the Pashtuns, and within that he had these detailed discussions of different families,
I
to the
see.
point where he had these detailed family trees, and in one of them, you know, I even saw my grandparents. It kind of went down that
Oh, oh
detail.
wow, that's incredible.
So he then also reproduced a lot of, he just kind of typed out excerpts from these, for instance, these recommendation letters that this ancestor of mine had from British officers, which I otherwise would have
Right.
had to go into archives to find.
Oh, that's
Um,
really convenient.
so that really helped. And then otherwise
Okay,
there were references, and some of these British sources are quite easy to find online nowadays
that's
for
true.
free. So
That's
that also
true.
really helped. And once you start to
Mm-hmm.
know where you're looking, it becomes easier. But I did also kind of add to it with a bit of interviewing on that
Mm.
side of the family that he came from, because
Mm-hmm.
he's quite a well-known figure.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I did also talk and get some sense of like the oral history of that as well.
It's nice that you're able to sort of bring all of these sources together in a very exciting way. So look forward to hearing more about that in the future. And it's nice that you've brought that into your masters as well. And for you, what has been the main surprises or challenges studying Iran?
Yeah, well, I think the question itself kind of leads into one of the main things I wanted to talk about, which is the idea of studying Iran, because in a sense I don't study Iran,
Mm-hmm.
but I do of course study things that we would agree are part of Iranian studies. I study people who speak Iranian languages, who use Persian as a language of state and of culture, who in some senses, I was just reading recently about one primary source from the Durrani period where it was saying that there was this distinction drawn up between Afghans from Iran, meaning
Mm-hmm.
Western, what we now call Afghanistan at the time, was usually more referred to as Khorasan, as Afghanistan
Right.
is also a much later term. And Afghans of India, who are from east of the Khyber Pass, Peshawar, nowadays Pakistan and the tribal areas. So people who, you know,
Mm.
partially also refer to themselves as Iranian in some way, not in the way that we think of it today. So it all is related, but of course it's not Iran the country. And I think just the issue of that even in the academic world, this ordering of the world on national lines still reproduces itself in terms of where the focus for study goes, how it gets organized, how departments are structured,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that makes studying places like Peshawar, which are a bit more liminal, a bit more, which are kind of caught between nation states, a
Yes.
little bit harder, and it tends to siphon attention away from these places because, I mean, Iran, within the context of Iranian studies, Iran is kind of the prestige zone and it's kind of the center. But of course,
Mm-hmm.
even within, you know, for me, a lot of the attention on the Durrani period gets diverted, is considered kind of Afghan studies or Afghan history. And it
Mm-hmm.
tends to focus on a lot of source bases and scholarship that focuses on stuff within the boundaries of modern Afghanistan. And
Mm-hmm.
Peshawar kind of falls by the wayside, despite it being, you know, a part-time capital, one of the
Mm-hmm.
wealthiest provinces, and being very central to the kind of core system of that empire, but it becomes marginal uh,
Mm.
in this way. So that has been one of the major challenges. And even when
Mm.
kind of studying Persian at university here, and I understand this is necessary from a practical point of view, but it was interesting for me to note that, of course, I learned standard Iranian,
Right.
Persian, Farsi,
Yes.
and you know, I sometimes, because of uh, Urdu or Pashto, I would pronounce words more in line with how I'm familiar with them. But of course, and that's
Sure.
discouraged. Just kind of, it's non-standard. It's fine. It's regional, but it's people won't know what you're saying. It's not standard Persian.
Mm.
But of course, for
Mm.
my research, it's much more useful
Of
to have a
course.
more Dari or Urdu inflected Persian than it is to have Farsi in a way.
Definitely. Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so it was interesting that kind of that kind of distinction, that Iran is kind of that center of gravity, but though it tends to pull people in that way. Just one last thing on that.
No, it's fascinating. You're saying a lot of things that make a lot of sense, and it's interesting to hear that perspective, definitely. So please continue.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, but of course that is kind of within Iranian studies. But on the other hand, if you widen it and look at Middle Eastern studies, I know that for instance, a professor here will just as quickly argue and be frustrated by the fact that Iran is not really taken seriously within Middle Eastern studies, and that it is a kind of periphery of that. So as you widen it, it's a different dynamic, and there the prestige zones are very much more Ottoman studies, Turkish studies, the Arab world. Especially in the Netherlands, you have a lot on Morocco. Also, because of the Netherlands, you have a decent amount about Indonesia,
of course,
and then Turkey. And Iran and Central Asia, and then Iran and definitely Central Asia are much more marginal. But then within Iranian studies, you have another dynamic coming up. So it kind of depends on your perspective.
That's interesting. It's sort of like the scope gets sort of smaller and smaller. And I think this is something that I myself, in starting this project, have also had to face, that sort of like focusing exclusively on the nation state of Iran. It is just going to box me into a very specific, not only a geographical area, but a time period, because Iran's borders shifted and Iran's reach shifted. So it's probably more, it's more accurate to sort of describe the Persianate world rather than just Iran, I think. But just for, as you rightly said, just for the purposes of being neat and easy, that's why I've just sort of like encompassed it all under the umbrella of Iranian studies, which is, I think, what's happened with a lot of university programs and university courses, is that they say Iranian studies, but sometimes it can mean other things in a bigger geographical area. I'm very curious to see where the field goes, because I think there is more of an interest to widen that scope to include even, especially Afghanistan, because usually that would have fallen under South Asian studies or something. But I think more and more that's it's becoming less of the case. So well, definitely, you need to strike forward in that direction, I think.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, I think it's also it's because the national boundaries are one thing, but then of course there's these regional kind of things that we have. This is Middle East, or is it Central Asia, or is it South Asia? So Afghanistan is also kind of caught between, some people will include it in Central Asia, some people only include Northern Afghanistan in Central Asia, and the rest is South Asia. Ultimately, these things are, as you say, they're necessary in a way to box things in, but can't, one should not just accept them outright. Otherwise, Afghanistan basically doesn't get studied within anywhere.
It's like, oh no, no, which would defeat the purpose. It's funny, I think a lot of our way of thinking is very much rooted in colonialism and sort of British imperial delineations of borders. So in Iran, places like Khorasan would not have come under Iran to them. That would have been part of India. So in their colonial mindset, and I think they even divided their consulates and embassies like that. So Eastern Iran was not ruled by London; it was ruled by India.
Yeah, by India,
which is fascinating.
Even I think Aden and those protectorates were under Indian government.
All Indian government, exactly. So it's interesting how we've sort of seen that way. Anyway, very interesting, very interesting discussion, and I think we can continue. We can keep continuing with this conversation in any case. But sort of as a final question, I'm wondering what you plan to do after your master's. Are you considering to stay on in academia, or what exactly you're thinking of doing?
Yes, well, broadly, I think I'm looking at an academic track indeed. I do want to stay on in academia in some capacity. So I am looking at PhD programs where possible. It's not the most fertile ground for Middle East studies, and especially this kind of Central Asian or Persianate studies at the moment. But something will come up, hopefully. And beyond that, as I said, I would like to be in academia in some capacity, but what capacity exactly, that you know, it still remains to be seen if I, you know, will take well to yeah, different ways of doing things, or if I want to become really embedded in the university system, or if I want to be a bit more detached from that and conduct research more separately. I'm not sure. It really depends. But I will say that I'm not terribly ambitious. If I can like make good research that I think is good for my kind of area of interest and then live comfortably, I don't need to be the head of any colleges or anything. So that pressure is off.
Oh, no, I think that's probably the best way to go into academia, is if you want to go in with just the love of research rather than just the titles and that sort of thing. So I think you're on a good track nonetheless. Timur, it was really, really wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed our conversation. And as I said, you know, let's keep chatting, and I hope to see where your research goes.
Yeah, thanks very much. And it was a real pleasure.